Joining me today is Erik Francis, who is an international author and presenter from Scottsdale, Arizona. Erik has over 20 years of experience working as a classroom teacher, a site administrator, an education program specialist with state agencies, as well as a professional development trainer. He provides academic and professional development to K 12 schools, to colleges, to universities on developing rigorous learning environments. His areas of expertise include teaching and learning for depth of knowledge, higher level questioning and inquiry, authentic learning, differentiated instruction, and personalized learning. Erik is the author of the book, Now That's a Good Question: How to Promote Cognitive Rigor Through Classroom Questioning, and that was published through ASCD. And his forthcoming book on teaching and learning for depth of knowledge is set to be published by Solution Tree in 2021. So we're looking forward to that publication from Erik as well. So I'm excited to have Erik on the podcast today. Erik, welcome to the Tom Schimmer podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Awesome. I've been
Awesome.
looking forward to this conversation. We've talked a little bit through social media and through other conversations, and I've looked forward to this conversation. I really want to dig in because I think that for listeners, this idea of cognitive rigor is something that, on the one hand, we understand its importance, but still for some of us, it might elude us. So we're going to dig into cognitive rigor and depth of knowledge and really dig into those details. So Erik, let's start with the title of your first book. What is a good question, and how do you define cognitive rigor?
Okay. Well, it's really interesting you asked that question. What is a good question? Because what I'd say to people is that it's not what is a good question, it's what a good question does. So a good question stimulates deeper thinking. When I ask you a question that basically it is meant to spark your thinking. What I like to say is that if I had CAT scans and MRIs in front of everybody, that if I asked you a question, you would watch them light up because it sparks your brain. So
Mm.
it stimulates deeper thinking when I'm asking a question. A good question also deepens knowledge, understanding, awareness. You're not supposed to know the answer. And it's okay to say, I don't know. I see a few things out there lately where people are saying, well, we don't want them to say, I don't know. Yes, we do want them to say, I don't know, because when you don't know, that stimulates thinking and that also encourages learning. If they say, I don't know towards the end of the experience or at the end of the experience, then we have the problem. So if you ask them a question and they say, I don't know, then as a teacher, you should be saying, well, I don't expect you to. I'm just starting the lesson. But by the end of this lesson, or by the end of this unit, or by the end of this experience, you will know. A good question also expands knowledge and extends thinking. It's supposed to basically challenge your thinking. It's supposed to make you think about something that you maybe never ever thought about. And a good question also piques curiosity, imagination, interest, and wonder. When I ask you a good question, it really is supposed to get your mind to get into that multisensory visual sense where you're thinking about it, you're seeing it, you're hearing it.
Mm.
And a good question also allows students to express and share their learning in their own unique way. Questioning is about communication. Questioning is not about answering, it's about addressing and responding. Because traditionally, we give an answer and that's the end of it. But that's not what good questions are about. What I've also added since the book, because I've seen a lot of things out there about questioning and inquiry lately, that's kind of made me do like to call the Dwayne Johnson, so
Yeah.
two things I'm adding to it is that a good question needs to be phrased as a question. I see
Mm.
so many things out there and says, this is a question. No, it's not. It may have a question stem with it, but when you're saying describe how, explain why, that's not a question. It's a directive. If that direction or that statement makes you sound more like Arlie Emery from Full Metal Jacket or when he's the green soldier in Toy Story than Socrates, it's not a question. And also, a good question basically encourages you to reflect and respond. You're not supposed to answer quickly. So, like, for example, if I said to you, um, so how did Edgar Allan Poe create an entire genre of literary fiction? You say, I don't know. But I don't expect you to because I'm just starting a lesson. What if I told you that Edgar Allan Poe was the first author to write a detective mystery story that featured a sleuth who used deductive reasoning and logic to solve a crime? And what if I told you that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, 50 years later, when he created Sherlock Holmes, he actually admitted that he based the character on a character Edgar Allan Poe created 50 years before named C. Auguste Dupin in The Murders in the Rue Morgue? Think about how much I just taught you,
Right.
and I didn't even lecture. I asked a question. So that's the thing. When I ask you a question, so I could basically come in there and say to you, so how could addition and rounding be used to prove that 2 + 2 could equal 5? Well, everyone will say, well, 2 + 2 can equal 5. Well, what if I use addition and rounding? Could 2 + 2 equal 5? See, and that's what gets you into it. That's what gets you invested in it. And in our world where answers come free, because answers all are right here. I mean,
Right.
I can go on a computer and get the answer to everything. Okay. And when people say if you can Google it, it's not a good question, that's not true. Google is our resource. Google gives us the answers. But what we need to do with the answers, that's the true teaching. And that's what I even say to some teachers, that give them the answer and have them think deeply. And that's that whole thing about cognitive rigor. Because
Mhm.
cognitive rigor, I didn't create that concept. Karen Hess came up with it, and it was really fascinating how she did it, where she, for years, was talking about depth of knowledge in terms of assessment alignment. And most people use Bloom's taxonomy, but they use people started using depth of knowledge after Webb came out with it. So she created that matrix. What I did with the definition of cognitive rigor, my definition of cognitive rigor derived from hers, and her matrix is that cognitive rigor demands students to demonstrate different levels of thinking and understand and use their knowledge in different contexts, understand and use their depth of knowledge. So if the true definition of cognitive rigor is that cognitive rigor is about demonstrating different levels of thinking and understanding you using depth of knowledge in different contexts and in your own unique way. So that's pretty much the definition I've come up with when it comes to cognitive rigor.
So interesting. I love that idea of not seeking answers, but stimulating thinking through the question, and not really just looking for that answer. And you're right. There's a lot of that sort of, yes, you can Google the answer, but that's not really what we're after in terms of trying to reach students to think differently, or think creatively, or think even critically about different questions that we pose to them, for sure. So what are you talk a lot about the 8 types of questions that promote cognitive rigor. Can you kind of run us through those 8 types of questions that do promote that, and how do we sort of expand our repertoire to really know how to infuse this into our practice on a daily basis?
Well, a lot of actually what came out of good questions and why I did good questions was because of um, the discussions around what's an essential question. I mean, I ask in my trainings, what's an essential question? And I say, well, what if I said it depends upon who you read? Because you have Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe's concept of what essential questions are, which was derived from Ted Sizer with his essential schools. And Ted Sizer talks about how essential questions address the core ideas and enduring understandings of a subject. But Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe says it's the most important question we can ask the students to have them engage in deeper learning. And then you have John Larmer come in and say it's the driving question for a project-based learning experience. So the first question I say is that the first type of good question that promotes cognitive rigor is an essential question, and there's 4 types. You have the
Okay.
universal, and that's the grander, bigger, broader theme. Like if I asked you, what is life? And then I can ask the kids, what's the dictionary definition? What's the religious definition? What's the philosophical? What's the legal? Okay. An
Mhm.
overarching question addresses the core ideas and enduring understandings of a subject. That's found in our anchor standards, or the standards of mathematical practice. It's the question I can ask any grade level. So I can ask, how does science explain natural events and phenomena? Or how can the central idea and theme of a text be determined and its development over the course of the text? I can say to you then, pick 3 units you learned this year, answer this question. Pick 3 texts you read this year, answer that question. So it's actually more of a summative question in terms of grade level. And I can do that at any grade level. I can compare the answers, like what'd you say in 3rd grade to what'd you say in 6th grade? I can ask that question every year. Topical is about the unit. So if I'm teaching about organisms and environment, how does an organism grow and develop in an environment? That's my science topical question. It's the one assessment question. Or how does um, a text we're reading in literature, like an informational text or a fiction text, how does it address the central idea or theme of life? The driving question encourages you to express and share your learning in your own unique way. And that is more of what we use for project-based learning or problem-based learning. And that's often prefaced with the 3 words, how could you? In fact, I could put how could you in front of every standard objective, and I come up with a driving question. So if the standard says fluently multiply multi-digit numbers using the standard algorithm, how could you multiply multi-digit numbers fluently using a standard algorithm? Now I have my driving question because it's about personalized learning.
Mhm.
The other 7, and that's one category with 4 subsections. The other
Right.
7 is factual. That's your who, what, where, and when. You're basically recalling for factual knowledge. Your analyticals are your hows and whys, or what categorizes, or what classifies, or what yeah, so characterizes, classifies, right? Similarities and differences, what distinguishes. Your reflective, or your evaluative. So that's where you're asking, what is the effect, what impact, what influence, what are the causes, the connections, the consequences. Your hypotheticals are the most creative questions. And most often they will not be on standardized assessments because those are the
Mhm.
questions that ask, what if, what would happen, what could happen,
Right.
how may, how might, how will. Your argumentatives, now argumentative, you have to be careful because if you phrase an argumentative question that can only be answered with yes or no, or agree or disagree, that's not a good question. Those are called dichotomous questions. And there's
Right.
only 2 ways to answer them. So you need to give them the choice in the argumentative. So it shouldn't be, should the death penalty be abolished? Should the death penalty be abolished, legally permitted, or it depends on the situation? Or which ones allow for choice so they can justify?
Mhm.
Your effectives, they address actually the effective domain of Bloom's taxonomy, which talks about how people process information and respond to learning. So those are your questions of like, what do you think? How could you, what do you believe? What is your opinion, thought, perspective? How could you, how do you, how can you? Your personal question comes from the student. The
Mhm.
personal question is, you're teaching them all this stuff. You ask the students, okay, I'm teaching you this. What do you want to learn about this? That becomes their question. They take ownership of it and they go find a response and then they teach the class. That question really helps because there's a lot of books out there about questioning and inquiry where they talk about we need to have the kids ask questions more than the teachers ask questions. Well, that's great, but kids lose the art of questioning because of school.
Mhm.
Because you think of a child between the age of 2 and 5, they're asking questions. And what's the question you always ask? Why? Research shows a child between the age of 2 and 5 will ask 200 to 400 questions a day, and it's all to their mother. When they come to school, because that teacher now has 30 of other people's children going, why? Now that controls the questions. And the question is not for learning anymore. The question
Mhm.
is more for assessment. Do you
Mhm.
know this? And that's why we get put off on it a little bit. And that's why when kids go to preschool, they lose the art of questioning to learn. And then when they go to K through 2, you'll hear of a first grader go, I have a question. Well, what's your question? I went to McDonald's last night. Okay, what's your question? Nothing, so we need to teach it with the art of questioning. When they start to get to 3rd grade, where they start to get more so the summative of standardized assessments, we need to get to that test. We don't have time for questions, okay? And
Right.
that's when it starts to stop with the kids around 3rd grade. 4th and 5th grade, that still happens, but now you got more of the social peer pressure. You ask a question and someone goes, you're so stupid, or duh, or keep asking questions, Eric, we're wasting time. And then you get to middle school and you don't question. Okay.
Right.
Like it becomes more like a challenge. And then you get to high school. The worst thing you could ask a high school kid is, does anyone have any questions? Because they learned, no, I'm good. I'm
Right.
in, out, get my degree and done. We need to basically spark that art of questioning with kids. But we
Mhm.
as teachers, we need to model it. We can't just have kids ask questions to learn if we're not asking questions so they can learn. We need to
Right.
stop with so much asking questions to assess, and we need to focus on asking questions so the students learn.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pick up on that because I love that idea of thinking about the way we question because undoubtedly asking questions is probably the most frequent thing teachers do. Now, the degree of effectiveness can be up for debate, but the bottom line is that it's probably the most dominant action that a teacher takes is asking their students questions. So, what suggestions do you have for teachers wanting to audit their questioning practices? Like as they look at the what they do on a day-to-day basis, how do they kind of reflect and think about their own questioning techniques to ensure that they are modeling what it is you're hoping that they would model for their students?
Well, it's really funny, Tom, and something I learned actually in my career. We actually think that questioning is a natural thing teachers do, and it's not.
Hmm.
And that blew my mind. And that's something I had
Interesting.
to learn as a PD person. Because when
Okay.
I first started this whole thing, I come to your school and go, okay, guys, we're going to make good questions. Here's 8 different types of questions that promote cognitive rigor. Let's go make them. Nothing. So I really had to go and really say, wow, I have to help them and guide them and support them, not teach them. That kind of sounds very insulting if you think about it. But how do I
Mhm.
guide and support them? And that made me better as a presenter, because what I realized is I have to be responsive to the way the teachers say things and do things and the way they see things. Okay. So the first thing you need to do to be a good questioner is that you have to be naturally curious and you have to question everything. Okay. This is why I love the question formulation technique from the Right Questions Institute, because they talk about a cue focus. And the cue focus is a stimulus. Everything in life should be a stimulus. Let me give you an example. When COVID broke out, when the whole thing with coronavirus broke out, and I'm hearing now this is a pandemic, my mind is going into overdrive as a naturally curious, questioning person. Okay, what's a pandemic? What's the difference between a pandemic and an epidemic? What are the pandemics that have happened through history? How have those the pandemics been addressed? What's the difference between this pandemic and the pandemic that happened in this era, in this era? What's the connections with it? So it's that natural curiosity about it. Or to basically, someone says something to you, like, for example, not to get political, my daughter once asked me, Dad, is Donald Trump the most hated president in the United States history? And I said, I don't know. How do you think people felt about Abraham Lincoln when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation? How do you think people felt about Franklin Delano Roosevelt when he didn't want to get involved in World War II and then got pushed into getting involved in World War II because of the attack on Pearl Harbor? See, history often presents to us, the success. They don't present the other side. How do you think people felt about George Washington when a significant amount of the country did not want a centralized, powerful government at the federal level? So
Mm.
again, it's that thing, like someone says something, boom, you got a question. The other thing is it depends upon how you look at your standards. Okay. That your standards, the question is often embedded in the standard. So if I ask, for example, understand how the Articles of Confederation led to the writing of the US Constitution. Question stems right there. How? Take off understand. Now I got my question. So I came up with 2 ways to do this, is that, and it depends on how the teacher, and you have to really, as a PD person, why is it we differentiate instruction, but we don't differentiate professional development? And we need to look at our audience. So I help them 2 different ways. First way, 3 different ways actually. What I do first is say this, okay, take your standards, because all your questions come from your standards. Your standards are your finish line, as you know, with teaching and learning. Put how could you in front of every standard. Now you have the deepest, most personal question we can ask the kids. It naturally becomes that. Then what you do depends on what type of person you are. You can either reconstruct or rephrase the statement of objective, which is an imperative sentence, like fluently multiply multi-digit numbers using a standard algorithm. That's not a question. I can change that around the wording and say, okay, what is the Bloom's verb? Multiply. So I'm going to put that in form B, be multiplied. What am I multiplying? Using a standard algorithm. Okay. And what am I multiplying? Multi-digit numbers. Now I'm going to put my question stem there. How? Do I want to make it procedural? How can? Do I want to make it hypothetical? How could, which infers there's more than one way. Someone who's more logical and mathematical, or even bodily kinesthetic, they know how to rearrange the words like that.
Mhm.
Some people, they need to look at it and look from a different perspective. So what we need to learn, and the basic facts are actually airing the standards. So if I said analyze, interpret data on natural hazards to forecast future events, catastrophic events, and inform the development of technologies to mitigate their effects, I'm going to turn that into a factual statement. Data on natural hazards can be analyzed, interpreted to forecast future catastrophic events and inform the development of technologies to mitigate their effects. You're going to tell me how.
Right.
How can data on? So it's how you see it. And I
Hmm.
think that's the thing in terms of questioning. In terms of being in the moment, you have to look at it and say, am I telling the kids to do something, or am I asking the kids to think about something? Am I
Hmm.
sounding like Arlie Emery in Full Metal Jacket, or am I sounding like Socrates, where I'm walking in the Coliseum and asking that question and getting you to think?
Right.
Every time you want to tell the kids something, phrase as a question. So if you noticed when I was telling you about the Edgar Allan Poe thing, notice I
Hmm.
didn't say that Edgar Allan Poe wrote the first detective mystery story. I say, what if I told you?
Right.
So if you said that before every time you lectured, we say, what if I told you 2 + 2 could equal 5?
Hmm.
What if I told you I could use addition and rounding to make that true? Now go prove it. See, now I'm getting them to think deeper. So
Right.
again, it's really who you really have to look at who you are and how you can change your thinking approach. And that's what I do
Mhm.
as a PD person, is that I have that audience. I got to differentiate my professional development. There's the Erik Francis way, and I do it this way, but you're not Erik Francis, and I don't expect you to be Erik Francis. So my job is to figure out how could that work for you. To quote one of my favorite Peloton instructors, I have a Peloton, his name's Dennis Morton. He says, I give suggestions, you make decisions. So I'm going to give you all these different suggestions. You could do it this way, you could do it that way, you could do it that way. Take which way works for you. And none of it does. Okay, which one you like the best? I like this way. And then how can you make it your own?
During this time of COVID, obviously since the spring and into the summer, and now, of course, into the fall, I know you've been working with countless numbers of teachers and schools. So, what advice have you been? Questions are universal in a way. A good question will transfer, but obviously during the pandemic, when you're in remote learning or hybrid learning, there is maybe this reflex that has us thinking about things that are tangible, things that are easy, producing answers versus thinking. So, what are some of the pieces of advice you've been giving to teachers and schools about how they can maintain cognitive rigor, not just in the past, because we don't know what this year still holds for us. We don't know if schools a month from now, 2 months from now, are going to have to pivot. So, what are some of the pieces of advice you've been giving to teachers and schools about how to maintain cognitive rigor given the uncertainty of the pandemic?
Well, that's the thing. Questioning lends it to that, because we are now in this environment. Remember when I said, if you can Google it, it's not a good question. That's what many people say. No, now it's, if you can Google that question, your students will learn deeper. So I
Mhm.
can throw a question out there for you. Let's say I'll even throw a simple question. Who was the first president of the United States? Go and Google that. Someone Googles it, they see George Washington's picture, they see references to him. But when you scroll, you start to see references to a gentleman named John Hanson. And John Hanson was the first president appointed under the Articles of Confederation, which was the first governing document of the United States after the Revolution. The Articles of Confederation led to the US Constitution. So then my students would say, well, who's this John Hanson? And I say, well, click on the link. Well, it says this. And they say, what's your source? Wikipedia. Okay, Wikipedia, I know for educators, we've been looking at that saying, no, that's bad. You're right. It's not a source, but Wikipedia is the internet librarian. Like when you and I were growing up and we had to go research, we didn't look and say, John Hanson was the first president of the United States under the Congress assembled. Who told you that, Erik? Mrs. Dufresne down in the library. No, Wikipedia whittles down millions of sources into credible sources. And Wikipedia, you can't go on there unless the source is confirmed. You can't put stuff on there unless the source is confirmed. So when they do that and they see there's this other guy named John Hanson, and actually there were 7 other guys besides John Hanson who served under the Articles of Confederation. Now the question becomes, should George Washington continue to be credited as the first president of the United States, or should we acknowledge these other 8 presidents of the United States under Congress assembled, appointed under the Articles of Confederation? Now, the history purists will say, no, Washington is the first president. He was the first elected. It's what defines the presidency. And I'll say, you're right. And then you have that other person who's a divergent thinker who says, well, wait a minute, these guys were called presidents in name. What was the question? But this is basically what real world thinking is about.
Right.
Because when I did this at a school, a teacher said to me, John Hanson, and told me the whole story. And I
Mhm.
said, wow, you must be a historian. She goes, no, he's my ancestor.
Wow.
Okay. So that got word out with the kids, and the kids wanted to hire a lobbyist to go to Congress and have them pass a bill or have the president sign an executive order that that these presidents of the United States under Congress assembled should be acknowledged as presidents. So what I also do from there, I take a project where I give them a problem situation that these eight, from this experience, these the ancestors of these eight presidents of the United States under Congress assembled, I call them potosukas. They want their ancestors acknowledged. Pick one or five roles. You are the lobbyist they hired. What kind of argument could you create to basically justify that or support these ancestors? You're the congressperson who's against it. What kind of argument can you present against it? You are the mediator who was called in by the president to come up with a compromise. What kind of compromise could you come up with? You are the PR person, the public relations person who has to get it out there. There were 8 presidents before George Washington. What kind of promotional plan can you come out with? I mean, we can't even accept that Pluto's not a planet. You know, how are you going to get convinced people? You are the citizen who thinks this is a waste of time. What kind of op-ed editorial can you write for the paper to say why the government should not work on this? So again, look where that comes from.
Mhm.
Ask them questions and have them go and Google it. Hey, I found this source. What source did you find? It's this. Is it credible? Yeah. Can you share that with the class? Yeah. Put that in the chat box.
Mhm.
You can also do it with the younger kids. I get a lot of pushback sometimes from K-2 teachers like,
Right.
oh, the littles can't do it. Well, then you teach them how to do it. And my perspective on that is that when you say they're too young, my perspective is if not now, then when?
Right.
Because when they get older, they have other responsibilities. And a lot of times we're teachers, they also presume you already know this and you already learned this. So again, that question drives you. If not now, then when? The other
Mhm.
thing is, don't think you don't have time and you need to switch up the way you think about it. If you're
Mhm.
saying I have a lot of stuff to teach, that means you have a lot of work to do. But if you say they have a lot of stuff to learn or a lot of answers to learn, not stuff, answers to learn, now you're in that questioning mindset. What's the question I have to ask them so they can go and get that answer?
Yeah.
And that lends itself in this environment. We need to stop driving our online virtual platform like a Ford Edsel. Okay. This is a Tesla.
Mhm.
All right. And we cannot bring the brick and mortar experience into the virtual platform. We're having a harder time with it, or we're having as much of a hard time with it as our students. If you get them and do questioning, if you ask questions and have them Google it or have them go out and find it and ask them, what's the credibility to source? That's deeper learning because
Mhm.
credibility is huge.
Right.
So that's my thing. I would say try to figure out how you can come up with questions that kids can go do searches with or
Mhm.
reflect and respond to. That might make your job much easier and make the experience much more deeper and rewarding for everybody.
Yeah, I'm with you on the comment about the littles. I think obviously, if you look at a question that you would ask a high school student, that might not be applicable to someone who's 7 years old. But the idea that 7-year-olds can't think deeply for where they are in their growth and development is to me absurd. I think that we can promote thinking
Right.
at all levels for sure. Okay, so let's shift gears now and talk a little bit about Webb's DOK framework. And
Mhm.
I'm most interested in your sort of thoughts around the relationship and how you might articulate this. I hear this a lot from people. Should I use Webb's? Should I use Bloom's? Are they contradictory? Are they complementary? I hear this a lot with folks. So I'm interested in your perspective, Erik. How do you explain the relationship between Webb's DOK framework and Bloom's taxonomy?
First thing is basically this base. We have to really understand that Webb's depth of knowledge levels is not a taxonomy. So it's not like Bloom's. It's not like the solo taxonomy. It's not like Marzano's taxonomy
Mhm.
or the 6 facets of understanding or Casas' level of questioning or Fink's this development taxonomy of significant learning. It's not a taxonomy. The 4 levels are not measures, they're descriptors. They
Mhm.
describe 4 different ways in which students can demonstrate their learning or understand and use their knowledge. They
Mhm.
should not be considered better or higher. They're deeper or reduced. And that's the big thing that I talk about with depth of knowledge is that it is more of a descriptor than a measure. Rigor is the measure. Okay.
Right.
Thinking is the measure. Depth of knowledge is about the context. It's about basically when you're teaching and learning for depth of knowledge, you're asking what exactly and how deeply must I demonstrate my learning? What exactly and how deeply must I understand and use the knowledge? So that's the big thing. And that's why when Karen Hess made the matrix, she put it into matrix form and superimposed it because depth of knowledge supplements and supports learning. So I can have a student demonstrate a deeper level of thinking. Let's say, for example, let's use analyze because everyone loves the word analyze, and then I'm going to use create as well. Um, if I said analyze whether the information is contained in this text, that's a DOK1 because all I'm doing is recalling. Okay, I'm recalling information to analyze whether the information is text. My expectation is just do it. Okay, if I analyze how the information is presented in the text, now I'm at a DOK2 because I have to use information and basic reasoning or apply knowledge, concepts, and skills. This is what I call DOK descriptors. I have to do that to examine and explain with examples. That's how I respond. A DOK3 would be analyze the effect of the way this information is presented, or analyze what would happen if it was presented this way. That is a DOK3 because now you're using complex reasoning supported by evidence or thinking strategically to examine and explain with evidence. A DOK4 is analyze how two different texts addressing the same topic present the information and its impact on the audience.
Mhm.
It's not about doing more, it's about going deeper and extending it. Okay. It's always about depth. It's not about breadth, it's about depth.
Right.
So notice the same verb, higher level thinking,
Mhm.
4 different and deeper ways you can analyze. Let's use create because everyone thinks of create, oh, they're at the highest level of thinking. Create a chronological sequence of events. That's a timeline. All I'm doing is I'm
Right.
recalling the events creatively. Create and use a chronological sequence of events to compare developments that happen at the same time. Now that context a little deeper. I'm still creating, but now I'm using it. So it's everything that comes after the verb to compare developments that happen at the same time. It's not just the verb, it's what comes after the verb,
Right.
everything.
Right.
Create and use a chronological sequence to analyze the connections between events and developments. Now it's a 3, okay? Because now
Mhm.
I'm analyzing the connections with this, but I'm still creating. But I'm doing a DOK3 because I'm thinking strategically and using complex reasoning supported by evidence. Um, Create and use a chronological sequence of events to evaluate the impact events have on each other during the time period and in broader historical context. Now
Right.
I'm at a 4.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm still creating. So, with depth of knowledge, when you're looking at the verb, what I say to people is this: find out where it is in Bloom's. Great. Put that first verb aside. Now, look and see what comes after the verb.
Yeah.
That will tell you the depth of knowledge level demanded.
That is such a critical point, and one that I echo as well. And I know, as obviously you do too, is that was how you responded to the question. But so many times when I hear people say we analyze the standards, just look at the verb will help you, of course, with your assessment method. But the verb alone is not going to identify the cognitive complexity of that learning until you look at what comes after that and after that statement. So I love the fact that you've talked about that because I think it's such an
Well,
important part to
yeah.
remember.
And it's also, and this is the thing about people don't understand about standards, is that standards have multiple objectives in it.
Right.
I could say understand and use positive, negative numbers to describe how opposite values and measures can be represented. Boy, I have so many verbs in there.
Right.
Okay. So, what you're looking for with depth of knowledge is that the most cognitively demanding objective within a standard is what designates the overall depth of knowledge demanded.
Right.
So, and sometimes those objectives are very explicit. There's one objective,
Yeah.
period, another objective, period. But then you have objectives within the objective. You can have use positive and negative numbers to represent quantities in real world context, explaining the meaning of zero in each context. There's 3 objectives in there.
Right.
So I have to look and see which one is the most cognitively demanding. Now, when I have that, what I can do is I can create my items from those objectives. because Karen Hess even says that the DOK level, she calls them ceilings of assessment. And that's what I call them. They're not targets. They're
No.
targets for lessons, but they are not targets for assessments. They're ceilings. They inform the highest and deepest level. When you see a standard and you realize it's DOK level, you then say, wow, that's the deepest level that assessment will evaluate student learning. It won't evaluate at the next level because that'll make it too difficult. And they won't only evaluate it at that level because, again, that'll make it too difficult and unfair. It'll be the range. So I can deconstruct a standard and I can basically whittle it down to its learning targets and success criteria and say, this is the range in which items will assess student learning. Can you do this? No. Can you do this? No. Can you do this? Yes. That's where the teaching begins.
Right.
Okay. Instruction starts with the standard, but teaching begins with the level of depth of knowledge students can demonstrate. So I tier it. And more often than not, when we do teaching and learning and tier instruction, we're looking for what the kids can't do. With depth of knowledge, you're looking for what the kids can do. You're trying to find the strength and skills, the level of depth of knowledge of their strength and skills. And that's where you begin. You did it. Great. Now you can take it and do this. I can? Yeah. And you can take it and do this. I did it. That will get to it. That's the way that everybody can at least demonstrate proficiency. And I say at least, because with depth of knowledge, the great thing about depth of knowledge is that I believe strongly that depth of knowledge is that missing link between academic rigor and social emotional support and student responsiveness. So if I had an image, I would put depth of knowledge in a circle. I'd say academic rigor, social emotional support, student responsive. Because with teaching and testing, our responsibility is for students to demonstrate proficiency and to get to proficiency, teaching and testing. But with teaching and learning, our responsibility is to begin where the students are and have them go beyond the expectations, not only the expectations of standard, but the expectations of the students. And with DOK, if I know the DOK level of the assessment or the lesson is a 2, all I got to do is really get them to a 2 to demonstrate proficiency. But I don't just want them to meet the standard or achieve the standard. I want to extend their learning. And that doesn't mean exceed the standard. Exceed the standard means I'm going to the next grade level. I mean, extend it to say, here's the academic and here's the practical application of it. Here's the academic and here's how you personally can use it. That's what I mean by it. That's why I say I really believe depth of knowledge, and it hasn't been used this way. And I like to say what I do with depth of knowledge is DOK 3.0. Okay, I didn't create this thing. I'm an innovator, not an inventor. And Norman Webb created it. He created it for an assessment for as a criterion for alignment studies. Karen Hess created it as a measure for cognitive rigor. What I'm doing with it is that I'm turning this into a method and a model for teaching and learning. I'm taking it and trying to turn it into a multi-tiered system support, where within the DOK level, that's where the RTI happens. If I get at the DOK level of the standard or the learning intention or the activity or item, that right there, that's tier 1. I tier it to tier 2 to give kids extended learning time to see if they can do it. I tier it to tier 3 to see what intensive interventions they need, but they're not stuck there. You teach through the tiers. Depth of knowledge allows you to do that. And once you reach it, how can you go beyond it? And I really think that's the missing link. And that's actually what my book's going to be about for Solution Tree, how depth of knowledge is about the missing link between academic rigor, social emotional support, and student responsiveness.
Yeah, I want to just pick up quickly, just just as a reminder to listeners and everyone that sometimes that word ceiling gets misunderstood, and I think it's really critical that we understand that a ceiling for assessment doesn't equate to a ceiling for instruction or creative opportunities or interest or passion or pursuing what it is that you are interested in. And I think it's really important to keep those two straight, because when you talk about exceeding the expectations or moving above and beyond, if that ceiling for assessment is not set, then you're moving the goalposts when it comes to expectations around assessment and reporting, grading, meeting state standards or provincial curricula, et cetera. So I think it's really a really critical point you made there, Erik, about the ceiling for assessment does not mean the ceiling for instruction. We can extend students, we can take advantage of their opportunities, their passions, the things that they're curious about. We can nurture that. but that doesn't mean it all has to funnel back to their grade book and affect their grades for sure.
Absolutely right. And that's
Yeah.
why I distinguish it between teaching and testing and
Right.
teaching and learning. I'm not calling it assessment because assessment is the process. And I actually learned that from you with your books, reading a lot of that. So thank you. I mean, you're
You're
all
welcome.
over this book. I
Thank you.
appreciate that. And assessment is the process. Testing is the tool. Now, when I'm using that tool to teach to test, they have to demonstrate proficiency. Okay. That's the assessment can be standardized or it can be authentic.
Right.
And that's teaching for learning. Okay. Teaching for learning is about the student. It's I'm saying in the book that teaching and testing is proficiency based, but teaching and learning is competency based when it comes to depth of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I want to also say about depth of knowledge is there's not many people know about this. And this is actually something I think I've shared a little bit with you about this. There's actually a 6th level depth of knowledge that's specifically for students with exceptional needs.
Mm-hmm.
And that identification of exceptional needs are special education students, language learners, not just necessarily English language learners, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and gifted and talented. It's called H. Gary Cook is the gentleman who did it, and he made the 6 levels for alternative assessments. And what he did was he split DOK1 into 2 different levels called EDOCs. Okay, that's what Webb calls them. So instead of DOK1 being recall and reproduce, it's what I did with it is that I basically took the EDOCs and said EDOC1 for special needs students and language learners. Now, I'm not saying that special needs and language learners are the same. I'm talking about 2 different things, but it all boils down to communication and comprehension. So EDOC1 is respond. Can you comprehend instruction to respond to it? And with a special needs student, that might be comprehending in terms of what's being said to you in terms of cognitive functioning skills. With a language learner, do you understand it in the language? EDOC2 is reproduce. So can I repeat an action or reproduce a procedure? Then there's the DOK levels. But what's interesting about it when I took it is that I said, wow, this supplements DOK and you can slide it into any DOK level. So I can have an EDOC3, but then go supplement an EDOC1 or 2 with it, a DOK3, but an EDOC1 or 2 to say, you're gonna have to do this for the standard. Okay, can you respond to that instruction? Can you reproduce that? Can you do it at the level? I also took it and said, what about interventions and support for gifted and talented? Because we have tried to figure out how we can do RTI with gifted and talented. And that's the thing. So when you talked about like even exceeding the standards, I mean, that I don't even try to use exceed. I say surpass the expectations. Okay. Because you say exceed, oh, that means this. Okay. Yeah. So what I did with special education, what I did with gifted and talented is that I took the EDOCs and took the concepts of gifted and talented and how they receive support, supplemental specialized support. So an EDOC1 for gifted and talented would be acceleration, have them move quickly through the pace of the grade level instruction. The EDOC2 is enhancement. So what basically is you're enhancing the experience to say, how could you basically look at this in a different, deeper way? How can you develop your education endowments and your experience into personal expertise? And it's very sensitive using this because best practices are best practices. It just doesn't matter what grade level you are. It doesn't matter what your label is. Best practice is best practice. But what I didn't want to do with this is to say that, oh, this is just reserved for special education kids, or oh, this is just reserved for language learners, or this is just reserved, everybody can benefit for it. But in terms of RTI and intervention, or as a multi-tier system support, these EDOCs are the specialized support. It goes above and beyond the RTI. Specifically, it supports Buffer and Mattis's Malone's inverted RTI pyramid, because that one is not about going like this where you're trying to identify special education. That one's actually inverted where it whittles down to the individual student. So that point, this point right here, it's like tier 3 plus for that specialized service, but the student isn't stuck. The student isn't labeled. The student isn't signed. They aren't placed there. Every child should have the opportunity to not only be delivered grade level instruction, but also be provided interventions and have modifications made for them, but also most importantly, opportunities for extension, every child.
Right.
And that's DOK. Because if you use those levels, you say, man, I want to go and extend their learning to the next level.
Yeah.
Now I know this is at a DOK2. Now I'm going to take it to a DOK3. Now I'm going to take it to DOK4. Boy, they're not demonstrating their learning at DOK2. Well, can they do this at a DOK1? Can they do this at a DOK1? Can they do this as a DOK2? So now you're really using it as an identification piece to really identify their strengths.
Right.
That's what the book is going to be about that comes out next year.
Awesome. All right, Erik, I've heard this rant before, and I'm only going to give you 60 seconds because I have a couple of other questions I want to get to, but tell us 60 seconds or less, what is wrong with the DOK wheel? Go.
It's full of verbs, and it is not depth of knowledge. It's another way to do blooms. It is really just another way to do blooms. It actually is derived from the hot wheel, the higher order thinking wheel that was developed by Barbara Clark, who was a gifted specialist. The difference between the hot wheel and the DOK wheel is that the hot wheel has 5 spokes and the DOK wheel has 4. Okay. And the problem with the DOK wheel and the creation of it was that when Florida used depth of knowledge for their alignment studies, some teacher down there, this is a story I heard about, some teacher down there created this wheel and uploaded it to the internet. And then when the United States adopted the Common Core State Standards and said that they are driven by higher order thinking or measured by higher order thinking as categorized by Bloom's and depth of knowledge is designated by Webb's, everyone went, what's this depth of knowledge thing? Basically, what happened was that when we all went to Common Core in the States, 46 states went to it, one of the things as part of the Race to the Top grant, they said, don't every state make their own individual training. If somebody takes a training, share it with the other 45. So there was a particular state, I will not name the state, but I will allude to it, that some of the players on the team from this state in the past are Reggie Jackson, Lou Piniella, Derek Jeter, you can figure out what the state is. They created this training and a video. And what someone did was they did a Google search. Is there a visual out there for depth of knowledge? They found this wheel. And they said, oh, it came from Florida. Florida was using depth of knowledge for their assessment alignment. Oh, Jeb Bush was behind a lot of the Common Core. Where was the governor of Florida? This must be true. So they took this wheel, they made a video, and they made this poster, and they told all the 45 states, hey, this is depth of knowledge. So 46 states embedded them into their trainings and did a trainer model. So brought it back. People like you and me, we were going and making our presentations around this, writing articles about this. Yep. And it's completely inaccurate. Webb has refuted it. If you go on John Walkup's blog, Cognitive Rigor to the Core, there's the interview. He says it's not DOK. Karen Hess refutes it. I refute it. But for some reason, people are scared to recognize and realize that. And that's what I'm hoping my book will do, is that to say that this is the truth behind DOK. If you're using it and it's working for you, great. But it's working for you for assessing and instructing for higher order thinking. Yeah. It is not for depth of knowledge. And I strongly believe that's the reason why these assessments that we've been given for the last 10 years that are college and career readiness, I think that's the disconnect, because we've been assessing kids on this concept of depth of knowledge, and we were given the wrong tool. I mean, to me, and it's funny, I made a comparison like this where somebody said to me, well, we're going to keep on using the DOK wheel, and if it doesn't work for the teachers, we'll bring you in. And I said, okay, that's like saying, okay, I have this hockey team, I'm going to give you baseball bats to play hockey. If they lose that season, I'll say, oh, we had the wrong tool. Here's the right tool to do it. Right. It's inaccurate. It's incorrect. Yeah. Just Google it. Why is the DOK wheel inaccurate? You will find me, you will find Karen Hess, you will find Norman Webb, the guy who created it. He said, it's not accurate.
Yeah.
You know?
There you go. All right, I'm going to cut you off there because that was longer than 60 seconds, but that's all good. I wanted you to get that off your chest. I think that's such an important message because I know you've been a pretty, vocal proponent of making sure people are not using the wheel, and I wanted to give you that opportunity. All right, let's finish up with principals, curriculum directors, superintendents. So when you're working with principals leaders in general, what are some of your main messages to them for how they could cultivate a rigorous learning environment? How do you help work through principals or work through district leaders in the work that you do?
A lot of it, what I do is I try to find out what the strengths of the instructor is or what the strengths of the leader is and build upon those strengths so they basically can think divergently, not differently, divergently.
Right.
Um, Looking at it and really trying to figure out with teachers more so, how can we make your jobs easier? If you're working harder than the students, something's wrong. You got to flip it. And again, it's asking questions. Like I will ask you questions, not to just challenge you. I will ask you questions also to understand.
Mhm.
So a lot of what I do with it is to say, okay, what are you doing? How's that working for you? What if you tried it this way? When
Mhm.
I coach, it's not about teach like me. It's about helping you realize what you could do. Okay. Or looking at it from a different lens or looking at it from a different perspective. Okay. And that I usually try to say, okay, what's working first? And that's actually harder for them to come up with. Okay, what's not working? Oh, they'll tell you exactly what's not working.
Right.
A bigger thing is that figure out what your focus is. Okay. And also figure out how you're using assessments. One of the things I used to do as an administrator is that I will give the assessments and say, hey, this is how the students are doing it, on it. And then I'll say, okay, tell me how they're authentically doing. So when I ever get as a teacher and I said the kids are doing this in the assessment, I say, okay, yeah, because let me look at the item. And you have to look at the items on it. You can't just depend upon the standardized assessments or benchmarks. You have to look at it as, first of all, what was that item asking? How aligned was it? And what can I do to basically do authentic learning? Some people do better on open-ended questions than they do on multiple choice, but also looking at the social emotional part of it. And really my big focus is, can you show growth? That's really the biggest thing. Can you show growth? When it comes to school leaders, when they do observations, ask who's working harder, who's doing more of the talking, the teacher or the students? And please do not evaluate your teachers using Webb's depth of knowledge. Okay? It's not an evaluation tool, it's a
Right.
coaching tool. Okay. Like I can say, hey, I saw you came in here. You're doing this here today. How could you get this to the next level? Here's DOK1. How can you get them to do a DOK2? Here's DOK1. How can you get them to DOK3? That's also a message for state departments, because state departments for schools improvement, they're saying, oh, when I came in today, I noticed your class was only doing DOK1. I'm actually telling schools to say this. Yeah, because today I am basically having them acquire the knowledge. In a couple
Right.
of days from now, they're going to apply the knowledge. Next week, they're going to analyze it. And boy, we're going to augment it at the end of this unit. Why don't you come back in a couple of weeks and see what they did with it? You can't just judge on a snapshot or a walkthrough.
Right.
So use it as a tool for coaching, not evaluation. That's my
Right.
big message.
And we've got a whole nother podcast at some point to talk about how DOK is not a rubric and not a grading scale and not levels of proficiency. So that is I'm not even going to open that can of worms with you
Yeah, don't
today,
even talk
Erik.
about standard-based
Yeah,
grading
no,
now.
I
We only
know,
have so much
because
time.
you and I've had several conversations about that, and it's something I continue to make sure people understand that DOK is not your rubric. But anyway, Erik, I really
Yeah.
do appreciate this. Has been very informative, and I certainly appreciate your passion is coming through. Your depth of knowledge around DOK is obvious, and I know that this is one of those knife and fork conversations where you really do. You've just provided such great, food for thought, and
Thank
and
you.
I know that a lot of listeners, the brains are hurting now at this point because of the
So is mine.
sophistication, the sophistication with which you bring, to the sophistication you bring to the conversation is just it's impressive, and really appreciate it. We're going to shift gears here, as I always do. We're going to end our time with a little bit of fun. I'm going to ask you a few lighthearted questions. It's sort of 5 fun questions to finish up the interview so people can get to know you, Erik, a little bit more on a personal level. Just going to put you on the spot a little bit, nothing too intrusive. Feel free to take the questions or the answers in any way that you want to go. If the choices, for example, if I give you a this or that type of question and neither are applicable, go ahead and run in a different direction. But we're going to begin with the first question. And the first one is a this or that choice. I'm going to ask you Batman or Superman?
Superman. Oh,
And why so?
why? Because here's the thing. Here you got this guy who's got such immense power, and every day he's tempted to basically use that power for the wrong reasons, and he doesn't. Batman, I mean, Batman is cool, but Superman is impressive, and it's not just because of his feats. And there's actually a lot of religious allegory to it, because I mean, this guy has Midwestern farmer, small town values. He's got the power of a god, and actually it's really great when you see Superman. I'm a comic book guy, so you can tell,
I
I read
can
off the
tell.
rack actually. But but here's the thing. It's that the best fights you can see with Superman is when he fights with Darkseid, because he'll say to you, he goes, every day I hold back, but man, I see you and I have to thank you because you just let me be who I really am. So Superman, and it's like the world is dark enough, and Batman represents that darkness.
Yeah.
We need some light. And I mean, that's
Right.
funny, because to piggyback on Superman, my other favorite is Captain America. Because again, the world is dark around him, yet he stays true to his beliefs and values, and he's willing to basically listen, but also stay true to them. And that's why those are my two favorite,
Yeah.
Superman, Captain America.
Yeah, you wonder. You get Superman. Why do we need any other superheroes anyway? And Batman certainly would have fit in the '90s with everything clipped to his belt like a fanny pack and all those cool gadgets. But I'm with you on Superman for sure. Okay, number two. What is your favorite carnival food?
Oh man, the stuff that doesn't make my stomach sick.
Do you have an
So,
example?
uh, man, I like fry bread.
Okay.
I love fry bread. I mean, I'm not into like something that makes me worry about becoming a chemistry or biological experiment, or might make me grow a third arm out of my back.
Fair
Or
enough.
yeah, but fry bread. I would have to
Yeah.
say fry bread. I love fry
Carn-
bread.
Carnival food is interesting because you have to weigh out not just the flavor and the taste of the food, but you've got to think about what ride am I going on next in order to balance out what might happen in your stomach as a result of eating what you just ate. Okay, question.
You also got to think about the vendor who's selling the food and look how dirty the thing is.
That's fair enough. Okay, question three. This is kind of an ongoing debate out there, and it's the debate between, I'll give you, this is another one of those this or that's, In-N-Out or Five Guys.
Oh, In-N-Out. Oh my gosh, I'm going to lunch with my daughter right after this interview to In-N-Out. We got a couple of In-N-Outs here.
All right.
Totally In-N-Out. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. I swore off fast food for years.
Yeah.
I would go to Chick-fil-A. That's the fastest I would go, or Panda Express.
Right.
But man, my daughter introduced me In-N-Out. So here's the deal. Get the fries well done.
Okay.
Okay. When you do your order, say, I want my fries well done. That is what will make In-N-Out
That's the
best.
key.
So In-N-Out.
In-N-Out all the way. All right. It's good advice about the fries too. Appreciate that, Eric. Okay, number four. With the recent passing of Eddie Van Halen, and listeners, you need to know that Eric is a massive Van Halen fan. And Eric, am I right to assume you are on the David Lee Roth side of that ledger? Is that correct?
You're right.
Okay.
Yeah, you're correct.
I thought so. I thought so.
You're
So
accurate.
I'm wondering about with obviously Eddie Van Halen's passing was in the news. I'm wondering about your top five in any order. Well, maybe you have an order. Your top five Van Halen songs all time. What are your go-to Van Halen tunes when you want to really get after it as far as listening to the Van Halen music?
In any order?
Any order, doesn't have to be in order of top five. It just, what are your five most favorite Van Halen songs?
Popular is definitely Panama.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, Panama and Jump, from 1984.
Yeah.
That's the popular. Yeah. Deep cuts, Light Up the Sky, which is off Van Halen 2. Mean Street, that's kind of a single, but not. That's off Fair Warning. And gosh, gosh, there's so many. I'm trying to think about the one that really pumps. Oh, the one that makes me happy all the time is Van Halen's song off Van Halen 2 called Beautiful Girls.
Mm.
I'm a bum in the sun, and I got no fun. No, I got no special plans, special plans. All the bills are paid. I got it made in the shade, and all I need is that woman. Understand? I mean,
There we go.
like
Yeah.
I thought, you see the happiness with it.
Oh
So,
yeah.
but man, I'm such a Van Halen. I mean, I'm such a huge. I mean, seriously, I bought this, and notice I keep it next to my book. This is my little Eddie memorial guitar thing. I bought it
Yeah.
after he passed. The thing about Eddie Van Halen, and I think we can learn a lot from him as teachers, is that he was so egoless. He knew he was one of the greatest guitarists, one of the fastest guitarists. But man, he never bashed anybody, and he never ever a lot of the guitar errors of that time. What they used to do is they used to turn their back to the audience because no one wanted to steal their riffs. And Eddie didn't, and that's kind of like I try to adopt my philosophy like that. Is like you and I together, we do, you do assessment, I do DOK questioning. Eddie Van Halen's attitude was like, hey man, what music you playing? All right, let's jam. And that's kind of like the way I try to do things. Is like I would come to you and say, hey man, you're doing assessment, I got DOK, I got questioning, I'm Eddie Van Halen on this, you're Eric Clapton on that. Let's just jam, man. And that's kind of like my feeling about it. So I mean, seriously, I was really upset that day. When he died, I knew about it because it's funny. I know I'm going a little bit longer in the story with it. When I go to Pasadena, which is where they started, I wear a Van Halen shirt every time I go to Pasadena because there's always some guy who comes up to me older, some lady who comes up to me older, goes, "You like Van Halen?" Yeah, they played my backyard in 1970, whatever. Okay, because they were a backyard garage band. And when I flew home one time, this woman sits down next to me, and she's got Fender on her suitcase, and I said, "Do you play guitar?" Because I play guitar. She goes, "No, my husband works for Fender out here in Arizona." She goes, "I see you like Van Halen." I go, "Yeah, I'm a huge fan." She goes, "Well, my husband designed Michael Anthony's Jack Daniel's bass guitar."
Oh.
I was like, "Whoa!" So she showed me pictures of him, and she knew I was a fan because Michael Anthony's grandchild passed away, and I asked, how's he doing with that? And at the time, it was the talk about the rumors about them getting back together. And I said, "Okay, so you need to tell me, as a huge Van Halen fan, are they getting back together?" And she said, "They want to, but Eddie's sick." And she told me this about a year ago, and she told me that he was going to Germany to get the treatments, and that's where Farrah Fawcett went when she had her cancer treatments. I knew about the cancer for a long time, and then when he finally passed, I was like, "Oh my God!" It finally caught up, and there was an interview with his son Wolf, whose song "Distance." If you don't cry when you hear that song, it's yeah. I mean, look at me, 50 years old, big guy. I cry when I hear that song. What he did on the interview, because they asked him on Howard Stern, he said, "How close was he said, "I need to address the reunion." And the reunion was going to be that Michael Anthony was going to come back, and Dave and Sammy were going to do the leads and trade off. And they were either going to bring in Gary Sharon, who did the one hit Van Halen 3 album. And you think about that and you're like, man, what did we lose? And that to me, like, really made me think about appreciating the time you have, appreciating what the opportunities are. And that's hard right now with this pandemic, but make the most of the time, because you just don't know when it's going to be taken away from you. Think about what we were denied with that. So, but huge Van Halen fan, as you can tell.
Yeah, well, I knew that, and that's why I asked the question. I appreciate that. All right, so Erik, this is the last podcast I'm going to produce before Christmas, and so you are going to be the definitive voice on the final question, which is the question of whether or not Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Yes or no, and why is Die Hard a Christmas movie? Go ahead. Yeah.
Not even that it just only takes place at Christmas. What's the name of his wife in Die Hard? Holly. Okay. It is a Christmas movie. Okay. Right. I'll even give you one more. What if I told you that Die Hard is actually a sequel to a Frank Sinatra movie that was produced in the 1960s?
Oh, see, now you're putting DOK tricks on us here.
Yeah, it's based on a book called Nothing Lasts Forever, and it's the sequel to a book called The Detective. And what happened is that in the 1960s, Frank Sinatra adapted the detective, and he played the starring role, and he was the lead in the movie. And the book was by a guy named Roderick Thorpe, an author named Roderick Thorpe. And he wrote a book called The Detective that features this character. And then the sequel was called Nothing Lasts Forever, about that same character going to visit his daughter in California when there was a terrorist takeover. They changed it and made it Die Hard. So what not many people know is not only is Die Hard a Christmas movie, but Die Hard is also a sequel, a subtle sequel to a Frank Sinatra movie called The Detective in the 1960s. Don't believe me? Google it.
All right. Yeah. This is where I guess, last week, Cassandra and I stand alone as the only two people having asked this question of several. I will go to my grave and say that Die Hard is not a Christmas movie. It just happens to have Christmas things in it. But this is where you and I can agree to disagree, and that's fine.
So the other
Erik,
question you need to ask is Lethal Weapon a Christmas movie? Because
yeah,
it also happens at Christmas.
all I need to do is put a Christmas tree in a scene, and suddenly I've got myself a Christmas movie.
There you
But
go.
yeah, we can agree to disagree on that one because it really matters. One final question for you, Erik, and I know that you are familiar with the questions as we end our time together, and that is the question of success and happiness. One of the things that I'm looking at long term with the podcast, of course, is to explore the idea of not just success as an educator, but as a human being. What is success? What is happiness? So I pose this question to everyone, and I'm going to pose it to you, which is, if a random person stopped you on the street and asked you, what is your definition of success? How would you answer them?
Did I make a positive impact? But did I make a positive impact on somebody's life?
Yeah.
Did I make a positive impact? Did I make a positive impact on, my family, my students, someone I trained? Did I make a positive impact on their life? And did I do something that made them feel better or realize something?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's, to me, success. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's not wealth. It's not material. I mean, I've worked for somebody. Before I became a teacher, I worked in the film industry. I worked for a guy. Money didn't bring happiness, I'll tell you that. And even like fame and success is just really your sense of feeling like you made a positive contribution to this world and you made somebody feel better. And being unsuccessful means that it didn't work, but you didn't fail. See, I don't believe unsuccessful and failure are synonymous. Failure is when you don't. Like, I failed to become an astronaut. I never went. I failed to become a lawyer. I didn't go to law school, but I was unsuccessful working in the film industry, but at least I tried.
Right.
And I can walk away from that. So success is, did I make a positive impact? Did I change the world a little bit for making it a better place? That's for me for success. Happiness, I would say, is the love of my kids. I mean, I have these accolades. I mean, I still got to pay for my Starbucks, but that's what I like to say about it. But, the greatest role I have is dad.
Yeah.
I have kids who call me dad. And there's, or, even not even that, but being even like a father figure, like even to my niece and my nephew, or like someone, like a guy that they can look to, like they have, my, dads, but, being someone who's like kind of like not a role model, but someone they can look to and kind of like see, yeah, that's the type of person, I want to know or be. So I think that's my happiness, is that more so. That's actually tied to my success too. But my happiness is being a dad to my kids and seeing them succeed and seeing them, do well. And that's my happiness.
Yeah.
So,
No,
boy,
but
we
no
got
better.
this big energetic conversation, and I get so
Yeah.
serious and somber about that. So,
Okay.
but yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for that question, though.
Brings everything back into perspective, and I think for so many of us, we think about the people immediately around us and
Mhm.
measure our success and happiness by the impact we have on them and the impact they have on us.
Right.
And that plays for us. Erik, I can't thank you enough for all the time we spent together today. Listeners, I would really encourage you to follow Erik on Twitter. His Twitter handle is at MaverickEDU12. So that's at MaverickEDU12. Also encourage you to check out his website. That's www.maverickeducation.com.
No
Lots of
Steve's in Maverick. That's the big thing.
yeah.
Maverik.
No C, right. And
Yeah.
some great 60-second PD videos on there. A lot of great information, a lot of stuff to learn about Erik's work. Contacting Erik if you're ever interested in having Erik work with you or work with your school or work with your school district. There's ways to contact Erik that way. So again, Erik, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. Really looking forward to the new book, and just want to finish up by saying happy holidays to you and your family.
Happy holidays to you too. Thank you for having me. It was an honor and privilege to be here. This was great.